By the year 2007, this company had survived everything America could throw at it. It survived the Great Depression, when 1 in 4 men couldn't find work. It survived 2 world wars. It survived the shopping mall, the credit card, the arrival of the big box store. For more than 100 years, it had done one simple thing better than almost anyone alive. And that year, it was pulling in $20.2 billion a year from more than 1,000 stores across the United States, with a stock that traded near $85 a share. Then, in the span of about 17 months, most of that was simply gone. Not to a crash, not to a scandal, not to a war, a fire, or a fraud. It was killed by a good idea. A brilliant idea, in fact, delivered by one of the most respected men in American business. A man who had already built the single most profitable store on the face of the earth. His name was Ron Johnson, and the company was J.C. Penney. By the summer of 2020, every one of its 846 stores would go dark at the same time, and the $2 billion decision to save it would end with the company being sold to the very landlords who owned its buildings. So here is the question this whole story turns on. How does a company that survived the Great Depression get killed by a good idea in a good economy? How do you lose a $20 billion empire without a single villain twirling a mustache? The answer is a quiet mechanism. The kind of thing that almost never announces itself until it has already happened. And once you see it, you will start seeing it everywhere. Here is a myth worth clearing up before we go any further. You have heard the reason J.C. Penney died. You have heard it 100 times. Amazon killed it. The internet killed it. The department store was a dinosaur, and dinosaurs don't get a vote when the asteroid comes. That is a myth, a comfortable one, because it lets everybody off the hook. If the internet is a force of nature, then nobody made a mistake. The store was just standing in the wrong century. But hold that thought, because there is another retailer in this story. One that sold clothes and home goods out of physical buildings in the same malls to the same middle-class families in the exact same years. And while Penney was dying, that company was quietly building an empire worth more than $50 billion. Same asteroid. Opposite outcome. That story is coming. First, you have to understand what J.C. Penney actually was. Not the logo, the machine underneath it. Go back to the very beginning. 1902, a mining town called Kemmerer in the high plains of Wyoming. The son of a Baptist preacher named James Cash Penney puts up $2,000 for a 1/3 stake in a little dry goods store. He calls it the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. It is not a slogan for him. It is the whole business plan. He and his family live in the attic above the store, and the store sells exactly what mining families need, and it sells it at one honest, fixed price. No haggling, no games, cash only. In its first year, that little store cleared $8,000 on more than $28,000 in sales. Sit with that for a second, because that is the seed of everything. Penney did something clever with the people who worked for him. He never called them employees. He called them associates. The best of them didn't just earn a wage. They earned a stake in the next store, and their one job was to find and train the honest man who would run the store after that. A store that grew its own managers, who grew the next store, who grew the next. That is the engine. Remember that word. The engine. By 1912, there were 34 stores across the Rocky Mountains. In 1927, the company went public on the New York Stock Exchange. It rode out the crash of '29. It rode out the depression that followed, because when Americans had almost nothing, the store that sold decent goods at a fair fixed price was exactly the store they trusted. For most of the 20th century, J.C. Penney was the quiet backbone of the American middle class. Not glamorous, not Fifth Avenue. It was where a mother bought her kids school clothes and a set of towels and a wedding ring, all under one roof, and never felt talked down to. That was the engine. A specific customer treated with respect, offered a fair deal, coming back year after year, generation after generation. And by the 2000s, that engine had a very particular kind of fuel. The deal, the coupon in the Sunday paper, the doorbuster sale, the little thrill of walking out of the store certain you had beaten the system by $15. Penney's customer didn't just tolerate the coupons. She loved them. The hunt was the fun. The deal was the whole point. Now let's climb to the top of the mountain. By 2006, J.C. Penney posted revenue of $19.9 billion. The next year, 2007, it hit $20.2 billion. More than 1,060 department stores, 155,000 associates. The stock near $85 a share. It was one of the largest retailers in America, and from the outside, the machine looked like it would run forever. But here is where the quiet mechanism starts to hum, and almost nobody hears it. 2007 was the peak. It was also the beginning of the slide. The recession was coming. Shopping habits were shifting. The loyal customer base was aging, and it was shrinking, and it was not being replaced fast enough. Revenue drifted down from $20.2 billion to about $17.8 billion over the next few years. Not a collapse, a leak. The kind of slow, patient leak that a healthy company survives if it stays calm. Penney did not stay calm. Because a leaking company that still has billions in revenue and famous real estate is exactly the kind of company that attracts a certain kind of investor. His name was Bill Ackman, a hedge fund billionaire out of New York, sharp, confident, and absolutely certain he could see what the sleepy people running this old retailer could not. In 2010, Ackman's fund quietly bought up roughly $900 million of J.C. Penney stock and took a seat on the board. And Ackman had a conviction. He looked at that stock trading around $30 and he saw 60. He saw a company that just needed a bold enough leader to stop apologizing and reinvent itself. He decided the old CEO, a steady retail veteran named Mike Ullman, was too cautious for the moment. Penney didn't need a caretaker. It needed a visionary. And Ackman knew exactly which visionary he wanted. Now, here is what people get wrong about what happens next. They picture some clueless corporate suit who wandered in and wrecked the place by accident. That is not the story. Not even close. That is what makes this terrifying, instead of just sad. The man Ackman recruited was Ron Johnson, and in 2011, Ron Johnson was arguably the most admired retail mind on the planet. He was the executive who dreamed up the Apple Store, the clean glass, the open tables, the Genius Bar, the store you walked into just to hang out. Before Apple, he had helped make Target the cool discounter. He had, quite literally, built the most profitable stores per square foot in the history of retail. When J.C. Penney announced it had hired him, the stock jumped 14% in a single day. Just on his name. Wall Street didn't just approve. Wall Street celebrated. The savior had arrived. Ask yourself something. If the man who built the Apple Store walked into your struggling company and told you exactly how to fix it, would you argue with him? Would you dare? Almost nobody did. And that is the trap. Because Ron Johnson looked at J.C. Penney and he saw a mess. The endless coupons. The fake sales where they marked a shirt up to $60 just so they could slash it to $30 and call it a deal. The doorbusters at 4 in the morning. To a man who had built the most elegant retail experience on earth, all of it looked cheap, manipulative, beneath the company. So in February of 2012, he stood up and announced the new way. He called it fair and square. No more coupons, no more phony markdowns, no more hundreds of confusing sales events. Instead, every item would carry one honest, everyday, low price, set about 40% lower to start with. The tagline was blunt. Enough is enough. He redesigned the stores into 100 little boutiques, bringing in trendier brands to pull in younger, wealthier shoppers. He even changed the logo, shrinking the proud old name down to a stylish little JCP. He took the 99 cents off the end of every price, so a $15.99 sweater now just cost $15, clean and modern. On paper, it is beautiful. Honesty over gimmicks. Respect over manipulation. It is, in a strange way, a return to James Cash Penney's original golden rule. One fair, fixed, honest price. Treat the customer with dignity. There was just one problem, and Johnson said it out loud himself. Talking about the old coupons, the deals his customers adored, he said this: "Coupons were a drug. They really drove traffic." A drug. He looked at the single most loyal behavior of his single most loyal customer, and he decided it was an addiction he needed to cure her of. Think about that for a moment. He was not wrong that coupons drove traffic. He had that exactly right. What he missed is that the traffic was the whole business. And here is the decision that turned a risky idea into a catastrophe. When a large retail chain wants to test something this big, it tries it in a handful of stores. First, it watches, it learns, it adjusts. That is Retail 101. Ron Johnson skipped it. He rolled fair and square out to every single store in the country all at once, overnight. No test, no safety net. He shut off the coupons before the beautiful new stores were even built. He was so certain he bet the entire 100-year-old company on an idea he had never once tried. He was also, in a very literal sense, not in the building. Johnson refused to move to headquarters in Plano, Texas. He stayed in California and commuted to the company he was reinventing by corporate jet. He cleared out the old leadership, brought in his own people, and cut the commissions the sales staff lived on. The man rebuilding the machine had never really lived among the people it served. So what happened when the coupons vanished? The customer didn't feel freed. She felt robbed. She had never wanted an everyday low price. She wanted the hunt. She wanted to clip the coupon, drive to the store, and walk out, feeling like she had won. Johnson had taken away the game and left her with a receipt. And a woman who feels the thrill is gone does not stand there and admire your honest new pricing. She just stops coming. The numbers came in fast, and they were brutal. The first full quarter under the new plan, sales dropped 20%. Same-store sales, the truest measure of a retailer's health, fell nearly 19%. The company suspended its dividend, the payment it had made to shareholders for decades. Executives went on television to explain that customers simply didn't understand the strategy yet, that they needed to be educated. They were not confused. They were gone. By the fourth quarter of 2012, same-store sales had cratered almost 32%. Nearly a third of the business at the busiest shopping season of the year had evaporated. For the full year, revenue plunged about 25%, from roughly $17 billion down to just under $13 billion. $4.3 billion in sales gone in a single year. It was one of the worst declines any major American retailer had ever recorded. Analysts started using a phrase for it: retail suicide. In April of 2013, the board pulled the plug. Ron Johnson was fired after just 17 months. Even Bill Ackman, the man who had bet everything on him, admitted the whole thing had been, in his words, very close to a disaster. The Apple genius, the most admired retailer alive, had walked into a healthy patient with a slow leak and performed emergency surgery he had never practiced, and the patient nearly died on the table. Now, remember that promise I made you back at the start? The other retailer. Same asteroid, opposite outcome. While Ron Johnson was busy curing JCPenney's customers of their addiction to deals, another company was quietly getting rich on that exact addiction. That company is TJX, the parent of TJ Maxx, Marshalls, and HomeGoods. TJX built its entire empire on the one thing Johnson called a drug. They call it the treasure hunt. You walk in, and you never know what you'll find. The stock changes constantly. There might be one designer coat, marked down 60%, and if you don't grab it, it's gone. It is the deal, the thrill, the hunt, the win, distilled into a whole store. It is everything Penney's customer ever loved about a coupon turned into a business model. And it worked. It kept working. In 2015, TJX did about $29 billion in sales and passed Macy's to become the largest apparel retailer of its kind in the country. It kept climbing. $54 billion a few years later, then past $60 billion. All of it out of physical stores in the same malls and shopping centers, selling to the same middle-class families in the same internet age that supposedly killed the department store. So the myth dies right here. The internet did not kill JCPenney. The proof is that TJX was standing 3 doors down, thriving, doing the opposite. One company decided its customer's favorite thing was a disease. The other built a $50 billion empire by feeding it. Same asteroid. One of them just chose to walk into it. JCPenney never really recovered. Mike Ullman came back to stop the bleeding. Then came Marvin Ellison. Then Jill Soltau. Each of them tried. They brought back the coupons, brought back the sales, brought back the familiar brands. But you cannot unring a bell. Once the loyal customer learns to shop somewhere else, once she builds a new habit at a new store, she does not come running back just because you turned the lights back on. The stock that traded near $85 in 2007 fell to around $13 the day after Johnson left. A few years later, it was trading for a couple of dollars. By the time the pandemic arrived in 2020, the company had barely turned a real profit in nearly a decade, and it was carrying roughly $5 billion in debt. When COVID forced it to shut all 846 of its stores at once, the cash simply ran out. On the 15th of May 2020, JCPenney filed for bankruptcy. And here is the final, quiet indignity. When it came out the other side, the company was bought for around $1.75 billion by 2 firms called Simon Property Group and Brookfield. And who were they? They were shopping mall giants. They were, in fact, JCPenney's 2 biggest landlords. The company that James Cash Penney had built from a one-room store in a Wyoming mining town, the company that survived the Great Depression, ended up being rescued by the men it paid rent to. It did not die of a crash. It got absorbed into the walls it used to fill. So let's go back to the engine. For 100 years, JCPenney ran on one machine. A specific customer treated with respect, offered a fair deal, and coming back her whole life. The coupons, the sales, the treasure hunt. That was the fuel that machine ran on. It was the whole point. Ron Johnson looked at that engine and he thought he was cleaning it up. He thought he was making it more honest, more modern, more elegant. He was not a fool and he was not lazy, and that is exactly why this is so frightening. He was one of the smartest men in the business, and he still couldn't see the difference between the parts of the machine that embarrassed him and the parts that were actually holding it together. He didn't rebrand the store. He fired the customer. That is the whole lesson, and it is bigger than one retailer. A great fortune almost never dies from the thing you're watching for. Not the crash, not the scandal, not the war or the flood or the lawsuit. It dies quietly from the inside when someone in charge mistakes the engine for the decoration. When they keep the beautiful new logo and throw away the boring old thing that actually made the money. Penney did not run out of money because Americans stopped shopping. It ran out of money because it stopped understanding the person it was selling to, and it made that mistake in the name of improving things. So think back to where we started. A man on a stage in the winter of 2012, promising to free his customers from the thing they loved most. He truly believed he was saving them. He was so sure he never even tested it. And that certainty from that brilliant man cost a 110-year-old empire almost everything it had. Ask yourself the question that outlives this whole story. If someone smart and confident walked into the thing you built and told you your customer's favorite habit was really just a drug you needed to cure them of, would you have the nerve to say no? Because somewhere out there right now, there is another old, trusted, slightly boring company whose founder understood something its clever new leadership is about to forget. There always is. And the way that story ends is almost never the way anyone expects. If you liked this video, YouTube also thinks you're going to like this one on your screen. Go ahead and click it. I think it's the next story you're meant to hear.